Sir, step outside now." The words were sharp, unyielding. Daniel Carter froze, his heart pounding as he stared at the military convoy outside his small grocery store. Armed soldiers were everywhere, securing the perimeter, blocking off the street. Inside, terrified customers pressed against the walls. Some whispered. Others clutched their children. All Daniel had done was give free groceries to a struggling veteran the night before. Now the military had come for him. Had he made a terrible mistake? Had his simple act of kindness somehow put his family in danger? As an officer stepped forward, the entire town of Brooksville watched in stunned silence. What happens next will leave you speechless. Would you risk helping someone if it meant risking everything? Type yes if you would. Welcome to my channel. I'm so glad you're here, where we celebrate the power of kindness in every moment. If you enjoy this space, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps keep our community growing. The confrontation begins. The cool air hit Daniel's face as he stepped onto the sidewalk. The street outside his small-town grocery store, usually filled with people going about their day, was now an occupied zone. Humvees stood in formation. Soldiers, at least a dozen, held their positions, eyes locked on him. The air was thick with tension. "Is there a problem, officer?" Daniel asked, forcing his voice to stay calm. A tall, stern-looking officer stepped closer, his uniform crisp, his expression unreadable. "Major Grant, you gave food and money to a man last night," the officer said. "Is that correct?" Daniel's heart pounded. Yes, a man came in with his daughter. They needed help. A flicker of something, amusement, crossed Major Grant's face. Then, unexpectedly, his features softened into a small smile. "Mr. Carter," he said, "the man you helped wasn't just any veteran." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" The major glanced at Emily, who had followed Daniel outside, her grip still tight on his arm. Then he looked back at Daniel, his eyes suddenly serious. "The man you helped last night was Lieutenant Eric Dawson," he said. "He's not just a veteran. He's the commanding officer of Echo Company, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines." Daniel blinked. The name meant nothing to him, but the way the officer said it made his stomach twist. I don't understand," Daniel admitted. "Why would the military send an entire convoy over some groceries and $100 bill?" Major Grant's gaze hardened. "Because, Mr. Carter," he said, "Echo Company is your son's unit." Daniel felt the ground tilt beneath him. "What?" His voice barely came out. Emily's grip on his arm tightened. "Your son, Staff Sergeant Ryan Carter," the major continued, "was caught in an explosion 3 days ago during a classified mission overseas. The building collapsed. He was trapped." Emily let out a small gasp. "Oh, God, is Ryan okay?" Major Grant nodded. "Thanks to Lieutenant Dawson, your son is alive." Daniel's chest constricted. He struggled to breathe. "Wait, the man I helped last night, he saved my son's life?" "Yes," Major Grant confirmed. "Against orders. Lieutenant Dawson ran back into that building while it was still collapsing. He dragged your son out, but was critically injured in the process." Emily pressed a hand over her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. Daniel swayed on his feet. The man he had helped, the struggling father, had risked his life to save Ryan. "Lieutenant Dawson was medevaced home for surgery," Major Grant explained. "That's why he's here in Brooksville. That's why he walked into your store last night." A hush fell over the crowd. Then from behind Major Grant, a familiar figure emerged. A man in full military dress uniform, straight posture, crisp attire, medals on his chest. Lieutenant Eric Dawson. Daniel couldn't breathe. The last time he had seen this man, he had been in a hoodie, struggling to afford food for his daughter. Now in uniform, he looked like a hero. "I didn't want to accept your help last night," Dawson said as he approached. His voice was strong, proud. "But then I found that $100 bill with your note." Daniel swallowed hard. I didn't know." Dawson smiled. "I didn't know who you were either. But when I called my commanding officer to report an act of kindness from a fellow veteran," he shook his head, "that's when I learned you were Ryan's father." Emily was openly weeping now. "Your son talks about you all the time," Dawson continued. "About this store, about how it reminds him of home. But he always just called it my dad's market." Daniel felt something crack inside him. Before Daniel could respond, Major Grant gestured to the convoy. "The Marines take care of their own," he said. At his signal, soldiers moved to the trucks. But they weren't unloading weapons or equipment. They were unloading supplies, box after box. Premium goods, groceries, household necessities. Things Daniel could never afford to stock. "The entire battalion contributed," Major Grant explained. "They wanted to thank you, Mr. Carter. Your store is now fully restocked." Emily gasped, gripping Daniel's arm even tighter. And then a final Marine stepped from the last vehicle. A tall young man in uniform, his left arm in a sling but otherwise healthy. Daniel's world stopped. "Ryan!" Emily screamed first. "Ryan!" She ran to their son, sobbing, clutching him. Daniel couldn't move. His throat tightened. His vision blurred. Ryan grinned. "Hey, Dad!" And then finally, Daniel stepped forward and embraced his son. 1 year later, Carter's Market was transformed. The loan was gone. The store was thriving. But more importantly, Daniel had created a veterans corner, a space for military families to gather, connect and find support. Lieutenant Dawson sat at the counter, sharing stories with Daniel about their sons, their past, and the power of kindness. "You started all this with one act of generosity," Dawson said. Daniel shook his head. "I just did what anyone would do." Dawson smiled. "No, you didn't. That's what makes it special." The story of Carter's Market had spread beyond the small town of Brooksville. News stations picked it up. Then social media exploded with people sharing the incredible tale of how a simple act of kindness had come full circle. Daniel Carter, once struggling to keep his store afloat, now stood at the heart of a growing movement. His small grocery store had transformed into something far greater, a beacon of hope, generosity, and community. It started with a simple change. After the military left that day, Daniel didn't just expand his store. He created a veterans corner, a place where military families, retired soldiers, and struggling veterans could gather, share stories, and find the help they needed. At first, it was just a coffee station and a few donated books about military life. But soon, local businesses joined in. A bakery donated pastries every morning. A local job placement agency set up a board listing employment opportunities for veterans. And then something unexpected happened. People from outside Brooksville started showing up. Men and women in uniform, families of deployed soldiers, strangers who had never set foot in the town, all drawn by the story of Carter's Market. A man from Texas mailed a check, saying he had been a struggling veteran once and wished someone had done for him what Daniel had done for Lieutenant Dawson. A woman from New York flew in to thank Daniel in person. Her brother had been in Echo, company with Ryan and Dawson. She said their sacrifice saved his life, too. Brooksville's small population watched in awe as their quiet grocery store turned into a national symbol of gratitude. But Daniel wasn't done yet. One evening, as Daniel was locking up, he found Lieutenant Dawson sitting at one of the tables in Veterans Corner. "You're not just running a store anymore," Dawson said with a knowing smile. "You're leading something bigger." Daniel exhaled, running a hand over his graying hair. "I never expected any of this." Dawson leaned back, his expression serious now. "We need more places like this. Do you know how many veterans come home and feel like they have nowhere to go?" Daniel nodded. "Too many." Dawson hesitated, then leaned forward. "What if we changed that?" Daniel frowned. Daniel Carter leaned forward, his brows furrowing as he absorbed Lieutenant Dawson's words. "What do you mean, change that?" he asked. Dawson glanced around the veterans' corner, taking in the walls covered with military memorabilia, the bulletin board full of job postings and support services, and the quiet hum of conversation between two retired soldiers in the corner. "This place," Dawson said, "is more than just a grocery store. It's proof that one act of kindness can change a life. But what if we could do more? What if there were places like this all over the country?" Daniel sat back, considering it. A network of support centers for veterans? He had never thought of himself as a leader in anything other than running his store. But in the past year, he had seen firsthand how small gestures could create ripple effects. "How would we even start something like that?" Daniel asked. Dawson smirked. "We already have. Look at how many people come through this door just to be a part of it. Now imagine if every town had a place like Carter's Market, a place where veterans and their families could come not just for groceries, but for community and support. The idea lit a fire in Daniel's chest. He had struggled once, trying to keep this store alive, not realizing that its true purpose was far bigger than business. I don't know the first thing about setting up something like that, Daniel admitted. Dawson placed a firm hand on his shoulder. You didn't know the first thing about changing a soldier's life either, but you did it anyway. And look where that led. That night, Daniel sat at his kitchen table, flipping through letters from people across the country. A woman wrote about how her father, a Vietnam veteran, had been moved to tears hearing about Carter's Market. A retired Marine said he was inspired to open a coffee shop where veterans could gather in his own town. A young widow with 2 children shared how her husband, a fallen soldier, had dreamed of opening a store like Daniel's before he passed. Every letter told a story of how a single act of kindness had spread far beyond what Daniel could have ever imagined. He turned to Linda, who sat beside him, reading through the letters with misty eyes. "Do you think we can actually do this?" he asked her. She squeezed his hand. "I think you already have." Over the next 6 months, Daniel and Dawson worked together to create a blueprint for something much bigger than Carter's Market. They called it Operation Homefront. It started small, just an outreach program, helping struggling veterans and military families with essentials like food, job assistance, and financial aid. But then, businesses and volunteers began pouring in. A retired contractor offered to renovate spaces for veterans in need. A local university pledged to provide free training for former soldiers transitioning into civilian jobs. A national grocery chain donated food and supplies to help expand Carter's Market's outreach. Soon, what started as one store in Brooksville became a national movement. 1 year to the day since the military convoy had arrived at Carter's Market, Daniel stood in front of a brand new building. The sign above the entrance read, Operation Homefront, a place for veterans and their families. The crowd in front of him was bigger than anything he had ever seen. Soldiers in uniform, veterans with their families, townspeople who had been there from the very beginning. Daniel took a deep breath as he stepped up to the microphone. "I never set out to change the world," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I was just a man trying to run a small grocery store. But life has a way of showing us our true purpose when we least expect it." He looked toward the front row, where Lieutenant Dawson sat with his wife and daughter. Beside him was Ryan Carter, his son, home on leave, watching with pride. "What I've learned," Daniel continued, "is that acts of kindness don't just change lives. They build bridges. They create families. They remind us that no matter how tough things get, we are never alone." He turned toward Dawson and grinned. "This is just the beginning." The crowd erupted into applause as Daniel took the ceremonial pair of giant scissors and cut the ribbon. The doors to Operation Homefront opened for the first time, welcoming in a new era of support for those who had given everything for their country. And so, a single act of kindness, one bag of groceries, and 100less had grown into a movement that would touch thousands of lives. Sometimes, what you give comes back in ways you could never imagine. The end. Thanks for watching. Kindly like and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories.